Welcome.
Welcome.
So we have you lined up for about 30 minutes of talk. That'll probably include questions from the members of the subcommittee that are here, but we are very happy to have you and welcome any comments you have to share. So when you're ready, please let us know what's going on in your world.
Great. Hey, thank you, Todd. I don't think I'll need 30 minutes, but if you have questions, that's great. I've already submitted some written testimony, so I'll just kind of go over what I've submitted. So good afternoon, Chair Harris and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jean Wyndham. I'm the Public Records Coordinator for Oregon Health Authority. Thank you for the invitation to share Oregon Health Authority's process in responding to public records, and specifically the costs involved in processing those requests. Before addressing the fee issue, I think it would be helpful to share a brief background of the agency. In 2011, the Department of Human Services split into two agencies. At that time, Keeley West was charged with centralizing the public records process for OHA. With a background in law and journalism and the support of leadership, the goal was to build a public records process with transparency as a priority and with easy public access to records in a timely fashion. As time went on, Ms. West began to undertake additional responsibility, and it became apparent that they really needed a dedicated full-time position to maintain this process. So in 2017, I was hired to work in the director's office to handle the day-to-day records process and support the agency to not only comply with public records laws, but to also continue improving the policy and processes that increase the agency's transparency across all agency programs. So since Director Pat Allen took over in 2017, he and Deputy Director Chris Couts and Chief of Staff Don Jagger really reinforced that they view transparency as a core function of the agency. They and other leaders have made clear that the view transparency is not only legally required, but it really is an asset to the agency as it builds trust, public trust, and it provides positive relationships with members of the public. My work is really pretty much across the board. I am it, by the way. There's only one full-time person handling the requests. I track all the records. I log them in. I respond. I work with DOJ when it's possible. I work with every division gathering records. I actually develop and I provide cost estimates when it's necessary. And finally, I review all of the records before they go out and I redact where necessary. So the leadership's recognition of the importance of my work means that I am fully integrated into the function of OHA. I work as a team member with the various divisions to identify and gather those records. This makes it actually easy for us to turn the records around at a minimal or no cost. So to ensure that we're institutionalizing our best practices, I'm actually in the middle of drafting a public records process manual that will detail our procedures of how we implement and comply with the laws to best serve the public. So as to fees, I've already provided to you our policy for public records and the fees, and I believe you've posted it on your webpage. So our policy, among other things, we of course waive any costs under $100. And then as to the media and to nonprofits, anything in excess over $100, we cut in half. It's a 50% reduction. But really the bottom line is we waive almost all public records fees. So, with that being said, what we do not waive anything that requires searching of emails that returns hundreds to thousands of emails, which inevitably we have to convert to PDFs and review for redactions. And a lot of what the redactions are, at least in our agency, to do with personal health information. If we did not charge for this and were required to provide these records at no cost, we would minimally have to hire at least one more FTE. What we have found that works well is if I get a request and they're not really willing to work with me at the beginning to narrow the scope, and it returns a lot. Once again, I call them, I try to work with them, and that seems to really work to clarify and narrow the scope of the request. So our records really show our commitment to keeping the costs down while providing the public with requested records. So in 2021, we received 1,278 public records requests, 97% of which were completed within the statutory 15 business days. Of those 1,278, only 22 requests involved a cost estimate. So of those, they came from, 9 of those came from marketing and for-profit, 5 of the requests came from law firms, 4 from the media, 3 from individuals, and 1 from the union. So of those 22 requests, 13 of the requesters paid the fees. And of the 9 remaining ones that did not approve the fees, 3 of those were from law firms, 4 were from the media, 1 was for a for-profit corporation, and 1 from an individual. While they didn't approve the fees, they also didn't oppose them. They just said, "No, we don't want the records." So that being said, I just want to conclude with a few observations regarding crafting legislation addressing fees. First of all, I really applaud you. I know this is like a monumental task. I don't know how you guys are going to do it, but without simplifying it too much, I see the challenge as trying to draft a one-size-fits-all statute. Unfortunately, there's a level playing field for all agencies. So there'll be some agencies, for instance, that have the wherewithal to process and release records expeditiously, whereas there's other agencies that are limited in resources, whether it's FTEs or their records are not digital, which requires a lot of labor, but there may be other ones. And then there are agencies that I believe are doing it well. And so penalizing the agencies that are doing well by waiving fees entirely or capping them really removes the ability to negotiate the parameters of the request, which would lead to narrowing the request itself. And it would also inevitably lead to having to hire more people. I do see an opening. It just, in my opinion, that there may be a way to define actual costs. I see that I see various agencies define actual costs differently, but I do see a possibility of defining actual costs. And there also may be an area, and I don't know if you can do it statutorily, where there's a fixed reduction, where it's very specific of a percentage where the costs exceed a certain amount. So that's about all I have to offer. And I thank you for the opportunity, and I'm here to answer any questions you have or give you more details about the requests that had fees. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge, I believe Emily Harris, our chair, has joined the meeting, and I'd like to turn it over to her for a moment, and then I'm sure there will be questions for you after that. Emily, are you with us today?
Yes, I am here. Thank you very much, Todd. Sorry, I couldn't make the video work today, so I'm on the phone. Todd, can you hear me okay? If you can, I'm going to assume everyone else can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. And sorry, but could you tell me who else is here from the subcommittee?
Yes, Tyler is with us, and I believe that's it. So we don't have a quorum, so we cannot approve the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Mark is
okay,
here.
Oh, Mark is here
Mark,
as well.
Hey, Mark,
Hey, Mark, sorry.
Okay.
We do have a quorum then.
Okay. Well, I suppose we could formally approve the agenda. So can we do that? I guess can somebody make a
So
motion?
moved.
Just all in
And I
favor of approving
second.
the agenda? Okay, sorry, all
Aye.
in favor of approving the agenda? Okay, great.
Aye.
Thank you all very much. So yeah, thank you. I don't know if your first name is pronounced Jean or Jeannie, Ms. Wyndham.
Jean.
Jean, okay, well, I just want to say thank you very much, Jean Wyndham, for bringing this testimony. I do have a few questions, and I'm sure some other people on the subcommittee do. A couple clarifications, and I just so appreciate your bringing some thoughts on, sort of openings to this very thorny issue, as well as your experience managing the records for OHA. One question I had was, you said there may be a way to define costs, actual costs universally. How are costs defined now when you do calculate them at OHA? Actual costs or something else? Like what is the difference between actual costs and some other way to define them?
Okay, so once again, just pretty much we waive all fees. However, I'll give you one it usually involves emails. We've had some where they wanted 200 surveys from in-home healthcare. So then it comes down to how much time it takes to not gather the records, but to review the records, or prepare the records and review them. So we use DAS's number in their policy, like $40. Mine is $40 an hour for however long it takes me to convert everything to PDFs and review the records, redact them. And that doesn't include DOJ costs. One of the challenges is I may be faster than other people. So, but this is just where we are now. So I'm very good at knowing how long it takes me. And depending on the records, I can pretty much guess, is there going to be a lot of personal health information or there's going to be nothing? So it's going to be $40 an hour times however many hours I calculate. How I calculate that actual cost is I technically can go through emails 30 to 40 an hour. And so it's times that. And then if it's the media or nonprofits, we cut the cost in half. So that is the actual cost. There's nothing else. We don't, if someone has to go look for records in archives or, let me see, we don't charge for that. That's not part of providing records. That's our business process that we're responsible for. Does that
okay, and then yeah, that does answer the question. Thank you very much. And then when you work with the DOJ, that's for what situations do you turn to the DOJ?
Right. Well, as it turns out, I always say that it doesn't include DOJ costs, but I never charge for DOJ costs. It's just passed on to the agency, quite honestly.
Sorry, you broke up a little bit, and I apologize again that I'm on the phone. You said you never charge for DOJ costs; that just goes to the agency.
Yes, I even though I put it in a response, cost estimate, I always have a sentence in there that says that does not include DOJ costs. But even if I am going to, generally it has to do if there's something to do with attorney-client privilege or a nuance, I'll consult DOJ. But okay, they just send us the Oregon Health Authority pays it. We don't pass that along to a requester.
Understood. Okay. And then one more question, and I'll turn it over to other folks on the committee. What's the trigger for charging then for emails? You mentioned it, 200, you mentioned, hundreds of thousands of responses. Some of you, I'm sure, depending on the keywords, you could get an awful lot of email in a search. What's the bar for, hey, this is going to kick us into needing to charge? Is it a number of emails returned? What's your guidance there?
It's generally how long it's going to take me to do it, and I can say, there might be 100 emails. We're not going to charge for that, but it's generally time involved. I have a pretty good idea. If it's more than 10 hours, you're going to get a bill. You're going to get a cost estimate. But anything under 10 hours, it's more efficient for me to do the work and provide the records than go back and forth about what the cost is. So this is my job. This is part of my job. Anything in excess of 10 hours starts cutting into, I have other necessary work I do. I have other things besides public records that I do, and that becomes an issue.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you. I may have a few more questions, but anybody else on the committee? Todd, would you like to ask any questions?
Yes, but first I see that Mark Landauer has his hand up, so we'll let him go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I can't see the hands. Thank you very much.
Ms. Wyndham, thank you for being here. I very much appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Just one comment and then a question, if I may. want to be sure that everybody understands that the Oregon Health Authority is one of the largest state agencies that we have, and they have a very large budget. And Ms. Wyndham, I appreciate your statement that not all agencies or governments have the same capacities that you do. And so I really appreciate you acknowledging that, because there are many other local governments that are running on shoestrings. So thank you for that. My question to you, though, is you have generally done a 50% reduction for media inquiries or from nonprofits. Can you tell me what the thinking behind that is and why that wouldn't necessarily apply to the public as well? I'm just curious as to why the department has made this conscious decision to provide a 50% reduction, and would like to get a better understanding of why that is for the health authority. I think you're probably unique in that respect, at least in my knowledge base, and would be curious to learn a little bit more about why that is. Thank you so much again for being here today.
Thank you for the question. Quite honestly, I don't know the complete thinking around it, but I can give you an idea. One, I would have to agree with you. It really wouldn't matter if it was an individual to give them a 50% reduction. However, in the 5 years that I've been doing this, I don't really think I have had a request from an individual. Corporations are different. I'm just going to talk about individuals because the law firms pay for whatever the law firms are, do. They really aren't that costly. We're not spending hours and hours of time for an individual asking for records. It can take anywhere from a half an hour. It may take a few hours, but there is no cost involved. I think that may be the thinking is, because we really waived most of the fees, it wasn't necessary, but it seems that the requests that we received that end up being fairly large are from the media and from nonprofits.
Thank you.
Right, thank you both. Since I can't see you guys, I'm just going around the circle. Todd, do you have any questions?
I do, but I'm still going to hold off because Tyler has his hand up as well. So I want to make sure that the other members have an opportunity to ask their questions. And then don't worry, I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, Tyler, please go ahead.
Thank you both. And thank you, Jean, for being here. A quick question. You had mentioned in your testimony that calling and clarifying, what's being asked for usually helps to narrow the scope of the request. Are there common threads that you're finding when you make those calls? I'm just trying to think of how this group might start thinking about, parameters for searches that are helpful and common.
So, for all of the lawyers out there, one of the things that I run into a lot is they confuse discovery requests with public records requests. And any and all documents, just that's not helpful. So what I normally, at this point, I have a pretty good relationship with what I would call the regular media requests, the individual journalists, and I just pick up the phone and call them. Generally, the issue is they don't exactly know what they're looking for. I mean, they have an idea, but they don't know how it's kept within the agency itself. So what I can provide to them is when I ever see these, I actually will call them up and say, what is it that you're specifically looking for so I can help you? 20 search terms. I think I've actually gotten search terms that said, mobile, the mobile phone, but everybody signs their name with mobile in it, and it's going to pull up that in the search, and it's going to be meaningless. So I'm not sure I'm answering the question completely, but it's I'm proactive, and emails aren't good enough. They slow things down and they can be misunderstood. So I find that building a professional relationship with the requester, it's just much more efficient, you know, and everybody walks away happy. The requests that, and generally speaking, the ones that I was talking about that they didn't approve the request, they didn't really want to narrow the scope. And, you know, they obviously didn't really want the records that much. They just wanted to see, I mean, I've had that happen where after I have an amount, I will end up saying, hey, well, let's narrow the scope. If they don't want to, that's fine too. But this is how I find it. It's just, you know, everything's about relationships. It truly is, even in our professional capacities. And this is not an adversarial process. For me, every requester, it doesn't matter for me why they want those records. It doesn't matter. And so my job is to help them get what they're looking for. And that's it. Did I answer it? I'm not sure I answered that all the way.
No, I think that was very, very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Todd?
Yes, I think I'm up. Well, Gina, I have to say, I really appreciate a lot of what you're saying, and you're driving home a lot of the points that I try to convey to both public records requesters and records custodians, which is communication is key to this work, because ultimately it is essentially a relationship that you are forming. It's a conversation between both parties, and there's an absolute duty to communicate on both sides. And I think that's really important. So there's a lot of things I could touch on about what you said, but for the sake of everyone's time, I'm just going to focus on a few things you brought up that I'd like to just talk a little bit more about. And in doing so, I recognize that these opinions are your own based on the experiences you've had, but we're trying to draw from experienced people like yourself to learn more and understand so that we could hopefully draft legislation that, although it is one size fits all, in the best possible world brings all these considerations sort of into what we come up with. And so you mentioned that you do not, or OHA does not charge for essentially the searching and gathering of records, if I understood you correctly, but the potential for fees comes about when you're preparing, redacting, and so on and so forth. So that definitely seems like, or in my experience, that's a different take on what other public bodies do. But, you know, in your opinion, do you see that as one way forward defining, if not necessarily doing the OHA model of how you charge fees in relation to what you do with the records? Do you see creating categories or steps in the process and charging for some of them and not others as being one possible way forward to reduce costs, or at least not have them all potentially transferred to a requester?
Yes, I think that yes is the answer. One of the challenges that various agencies, and this is what's frustrating to the requester and possibly, you know, the bigger ones, how people are, you know, everyone's doing their job within an agency, but they've never been trained in, let's say, best business practices on how to store a record, which is very frustrating for me. And so everybody does it differently. You know, oh, it might be in somebody's drawer, or we sent it to archives, or we get, you know, there are all sorts of things that can happen. And I think that we have to be honest, is just because we have a certain process of storing, you know, for retention purposes, records, do we pass along that cost to a requester because of how we're storing our own records? That's frustrating. On the other hand, we have in part of our units, we have records that are not digital, that are health licensing officers. A lot of things are radiation that require us to scan those records. So there may be a lot. So it's not finding the records that we would charge with, but if it's preparing them, which means including scanning them, and for my ability to review those records, that might be part of a charge. So, and people might have larger requests, but once again, I basically, you know, I tell different programs, you're not spending any more than 10 hours on something, please just send me the records. We are not going to give a cost estimate on that. It almost seems inefficient in some ways.
Thank you for that. So something else I want to talk about is you mentioned that if you get a fee estimate that is over $100, that is a time in which you communicate again with the requester to try to bring those costs down. And you utilize that as a tool to help, limit potential fees, and that removing that option might otherwise handicap your work. But aren't there other ways that exist for a public body to also sort of incentivize a requester to work with them to reduce the time and cost of a request? So even if you didn't have this ability to, potentially collect costs at the rate that you're able to now, wouldn't things like time delays or even the ambiguity of a request that's too broad that doesn't really return anything responsive, do you see those as useful alternatives to being able to charge a fee as ways to incentivize a requester to narrow or limit at least their initial ask?
Yes. So for instance, I would say that a specific type of request, it usually will come from a law firm where they send me, actually they say it's a public records request, but within the body of their letter or email are 15 different requests. They're 50. And so there would be a time delay involved. So that is helpful. But once again, whenever I get requests, even before, I don't even get to the point of providing a cost estimate. When I try to do it proactively, it's like in the front is, wait a minute, I think I'm going to call you and say, hey, I got your request, your 15 items, or that you want to, what is it that you really are looking in? Usually that's the issue, is they want to cover everything and they don't know. And once I have a conversation with them, and part of centralizing, at least for OHA public records, is I literally work with every division. So, as an employee of Oregon Health Authority, I probably know more about what every single division does than anybody that works within their division. So it's very helpful in that sense. So usually it's a time delay issue, and which would be, I don't know, I'm trying to think, I'm not really sure. We don't really have, I try to move records out. That 97% is really important. It's like we try to meet that 15 statutory business day. So, but it's generally the bigger ones. It would either come from a for-profit, a law firm, or the media. But the individual requests, once again, there's just not, at least that's our experience. We're just not going to charge for it.
Okay, great. Thank you. I won't ask you any more questions right now, although I feel like we could chat about this all day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anytime.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Todd. And I know we're running out of your time. I do have two more, hopefully short questions for you. You had mentioned, having a relationship with a reporter, and a lot of the regular reporters on the beat. So my first question is whether you have any working definition of media that you use at the Health Authority. And my second question, which is a poor journalistic practice to ask two at once, but for efficiency, I'm going to try it. You mentioned, and Todd just alluded to it, the value of having some fees built in. But what would the actual hit to the budget be if all fees for public records requests were waived? And I wonder if you could think about that, if you know it, or we can follow up with you broadly. But then secondarily, what if it was fees by requester category, like law firms had to pay but media didn't, for example? Like, what would the hit to the budget be if there were no fees by different categories?
Well, let me address your first question, and thank you for that, because I believe there was a piece of legislation that was proposed about media, and I was very concerned about how that was defined. So, I was concerned because someone can say, "Oh, I'm a freelance journalist," which I do get these that are from another state, and they usually go through, I think it's MuckRock, and you get these incredible requests. I guess they're part of the media, or they say they are, or I'm thinking of it. I view the media as your standard media. whether it's television, our television channels, our newspapers, Oregonian, Statesman's Journal, Salem Report. Those are they are the professionals, is how I view that. I don't know how that would get defined, but that is really their job. That is what they are doing. And they are asking for records in the public interest, or they're developing a story that they believe the public, but that's how I define media. Requests. I cannot tell you my concern about waiving all fees. I do occasionally, particularly, and maybe it would have to be with law firms, but I have had requests from individuals that they just wanted to know, or they think there's something there, and they're not responsive to narrowing the request, which I then do the search. I mean, I'm still going to do that, but returns thousands of emails. If we didn't charge for that, it would not discourage anybody from saying, hey, I want to have all the emails of Pat Allen from 2017 to present. I have no idea what that would do to the budget. The budget right now is one full-time, employee. I'm an OPA 3. That's it. Everything else is done within any individual employee's time. That's why I say the 10 hours is everybody else has necessary work that they're required to do. And when I contact a division, I'm taking away their time from doing their real work to help me provide public records. So I don't have a really good idea of a number, but we would have to have a team because I would expect the request to flood in.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think some of our non-voting members of the subcommittee may be here. Is Representative Power or Senator Thatcher here? Would either of you like to join in this conversation? Sorry, again, I can't see who's here.
No problem.
I'm here, but
yeah,
I don't.
Hi, Senator Thatcher. Yep, Rep. Power is also here. I do have a question because that was one of the bills I brought. The point of the bill was not to define media, but to kind of, I think, get at the objective you're articulating, which is a more narrowly tailored approach. I'm kind of wondering, based on the comments you made around it not being really their job, what is the right balance, do you think, in providing staffing to be responsive? And based on your experience, is there a way we could figure out how to make these requests incentivized to be more narrowly tailored and thus manageable?
One of the, this is once again the challenge for this committee. Every agency is different and has different types of records. Within Oregon Health Authority, we have Health Systems Division, Medicaid, the hospital. I work with Office of Contracts and Procurement. I work within public health. There are various divisions: environmental health, epidemiology. And so I actually work with, I'm going to say, a go-to person that I know may have those records. So if we had to actually have a staff, I would probably have to have somebody from every single division or within that to be able to, if that was their job, that's all they did, to fulfill records requests. And another thing, a lot of this is now, not all of it is digital, but if it's not, they're scanning it. So everything is, comes to me. I pretty much release records electronically via email or Dropbox, or if a law firm has a shared file server, I will upload records to that. But that's what that would say. Representative, I'm not sure I answered that, but that's, we'd have to look into it.
All right, thank you. We have taken a little more time with you, Ms. Wyndham, than we had planned. I have a couple follow-up questions I will put into an email with you, and I encourage, I can gather them from my fellow council members if other people have questions. But thank you very, very much for your time today and all this experience that you've been able to share with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope it was helpful.
Absolutely, it was. Yes. Thanks. Okay, I'd next like to welcome Laura Hitchcock, Administrative Specialist in Central Records Section of the Oregon State Police. And again, apologies, I can't see anyone, but Laura, are you here?
Hi, Laura, you're muted.
Is that working now?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Okay.
very, very much for joining us. And I'll just turn it over to you if you want to give us a few introductory remarks, and then we'll just have some questions. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to make sure you can still hear me as the audio.
You're echoing now, Laura.
I'm sorry?
You're echoing.
Yeah, I'm having some audio problems. Okay, is that better?
Yep, you're good.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
good. First of all, just thank you for the invite and the opportunity to talk about how we process fees and some of our challenges. I also wanted to mention that Coral Smith is on as well, and she may jump in. She's also in the records section. She's the director. So my name is Laura Heathcock. I'm with the Central Records section. Our unit consists of 7 full-time employees. 2 of them are kind of support staff. They log requests, log payments, things like that. The primary function of the unit is to respond to records requests. We respond to agency requests as well as public records requests, and we receive about 837 total requests in a month, with over half of them being public records requests. So definitely keep us busy. We charge a flat rate on many of the records and an hourly rate based on the actual time, and we follow the DAS statewide fee schedule. Those fees do cover the cost to locate, compile, review, redact, and produce the records. Much of the time that we spend processing requests is not recovered in the fee, though. Additional things that we kind of discussed before, we don't charge for the time that we spend consulting about the request. We don't charge for the time that we spend writing letters, response letters, fee letters. It's just actually compiling, reviewing, and redacting the records. We spent about 91 hours on requests that we did not recover any fees for in a month. So we received 2 fee waiver requests in the past 6 months. One of them, we offered a fee reduction per DAS policy. The other one, we asked the requester for clarification. They never got back to us. On another 38 additional requests, we did not receive a fee waiver, but the agency determined that we would waive the fees. Those typically are victims requesting reports for recent incidents, and we waive the fees on those. As far as things that the agency has done preemptively to reduce the cost of high interest incidents, we will sometimes, if we have an incident that we know is going to be of high public interest, we will go ahead and gather those reports, review those reports, and prepare them as much as we can for release, knowing that these requests are going to come in. Generally, then the fee would be considerably reduced, and also if we receive subsequent requests, we don't recharge them for the work that was already done. So that's one thing that we've done. As far as the reason for the increase in cost in public record request, voluminous request, and very broad request are what increases the cost. And really the only tool that has been effective for us in reducing those costs is the fee itself, the ability to work with the requester to limit the scope of their request. And we've had a lot of success doing that. I think without that part of it, there really is no incentive for them to, let us know what they really want. In fact, a lot of times we'll get a request and we'll say, we'll give them a call, we'll try to work with them, and they'll say, oh, just send me the fee, let me know what everything's going to cost. Then they're a little bit more willing to work with us when they see that, 100 hours on this request is going to cost a little bit of money. So our fees for complex requests are quite different than the fees for the routine request. Back in 2015, the Secretary of State Audit identified that 90% of the requests are handled in a timely manner with minimal cost, and 10% of the request agencies struggled with. We found that was definitely the case for OSP. So we worked to resolve that problem by finding ways to identify those complex requests, separating them out, and having dedicated staff working on those. That's resulted in, we found that 93.2% of the requests are routine requests, and approximately 6.8% are complex. However, the hours spent on both groups of requests are about the same. So it takes us about the same amount of hours to do the 6.8% of complex requests. So again, fees are a factor that allow us to keep those routine requests from becoming complex requests. And that's what we try to work on. If we received only a 2% increase in the number of complex routine requests that turned into complex requests, we would need 2 additional employees. And that doesn't account for the number of requests that are already complex that will grow if there is no ability to negotiate. And generally that is because of the fee. An example is that we will often get fee requests for every email for every Oregon State Police employee based on certain keywords. We received one just recently, a week or so ago. Because of the fee, we're able to work with them, identify specific emails, and what would be, a request that would take many months to finish has now narrowed down. Still complex, still going to take a lot of hours, but not nearly as many hours. I appreciate Jean's comment about every agency's reports or records are different. Oregon State Police records are very different. The majority of the records requested are police investigative reports. There are personal privacy issues that need to be taken into account. Not that they don't need to be taken account into every public record, but with police records, it's pretty significant. There's victim information on these reports, and also there's the potential to profit from these reports. So, for example, a routine request, a request for a traffic accident report, it's something we get quite often, but we have attorneys who would love to request and do every single accident within their area. Fees are what keeps that in check a little bit. I can't imagine what the cost to the agency would be if we allowed for no fee every attorney to request every report for a motor vehicle accident so they can solicit business. And we do get those requests, but the volume is not what we would get if we just had no fee. Also, people who benefit from these and the fee kind of keeps it in check is, for example, request for fatal motor vehicle accidents to be put on YouTube. Even though we redact the image of the deceased person, this is very personal information that has potential to re-victimize people. I mean, and to traumatize the victims. And yet we get these requests, but the number of requests that we would get, the number that they would be able to put on their site so that they can increase their number of clicks or likes or whatever it is they need, would increase, I think, substantially. So the average cost of routine requests is $12.50. And that's what most reports cost, is $12.50. People who have an interest in getting that report, who were involved in that incident, who have an attorney who wants it, it's generally what they pay for the report is $12.50. It's the waiving the fee isn't going to benefit those people. It seems to me like it's going to benefit those people who want 5,000 reports because they want to sort through them to see who they can call maybe, or to put them on a, channel. So that potential to make a profit off of these plays a role in it. The complex requests, which are 6.8%, they average $221. These reports, these records are investigative records that often contain thousands and thousands of pages, text messages from personal cell phones, social media, interviews, email searches. These can get very, very huge. And again, the average cost of those is $221, some being much more, some being closer to the $12.50. With those, again, the fees is what allows us to call the requester, and they usually are willing to negotiate once we talk about money. As Jean brought up, one of the issues with media is, how do you define media? We get requests from people who send us very long dissertations on why they think they're media. And I don't know how we can say, they'll tell us their viewer, how many viewers they have, and give us all the definitions of what they think media is. And so that's a little bit problematic. We have authors quite frequently who want to write stories about murders or crimes that have happened. Are they media? Muckrock is an issue. They send, it's hard to identify who the requester is behind Muckrock, and they send very broad requests and don't usually work with us to narrow them down. They usually don't end up paying. So all of those requests, we get a lot of Muckrock. All of those we would be providing the records at no cost if fees were waived. Also, even narrowly defined defined requests can be pretty expensive. We had again, a YouTube requester just recently, just a couple days ago, who requested records for a specific incident, a specific record. So he wanted video for a specific incident. It's hard to get him to narrow that anymore. Still, that was over 90 hours worth of video. And so that can become an issue as well. I think basically for Oregon State Police, the issue is the type of records. It's not so much the staffing or the budget, it's the type of records that are being requested and the ability for people to make a profit off of those records, causing them to want to request thousands of them if there was no fee. And we literally did get get requests for 7,000 crash reports. We usually the fee stopped that, but Coral, that's kind of all I have. Coral, do you have anything?
No, I don't have anything to add. I think you really summarized kind of our processes and our outlook on public records very well. I will say that Oregon State Police is somewhat unique in that we also have Oregon State Fire Marshal under our agency umbrella, along with, a couple other specialty units in OSP, such as like forensics, gaming enforcement, things like that. So while the majority of our requests are, like Laura had said, kind of the routine police report requests, we also have a number of specialty requests that we get as well, which makes us a little bit different in terms of just broad and general public record requests.
Yeah, and one thing also I'll add is by separating out those complex requests, we improved our response time a lot. And if those complex requests or those routine requests turn into complex requests, if that request for a crash report or 2 crash reports or 5 turns into the 5,000, because there is no I think that's going to have a huge impact on response times in general and just the ability for people to get records in a timely manner. So maybe they're saving the $12.50, but it might take them, 4 months to get that report, or so that's, I think, something to consider as well.
Okay, great. Thank you both very much. Really appreciate this. I feel like I'm learning a lot, which is the whole point of these kind of meetings. So thank you. I had a couple questions for you, Laura. First, would you be able to give some indication of the complex requests? What percentage of those are made by what type of requesters?
So, well, we get them from all types of requesters, but many of them start out, media work with us pretty well, but some of them start out as media requests, and we're able to get them to narrow them down. A lot of them come from kind of special interest, groups who maybe aren't favorable toward law enforcement or things like that. They're looking for all dash cam video between a certain period of time because, they want to look for different things. Attorneys occasionally, it really could be anybody, but the way that we define complex request is several factors go into it. One, just the volume of records, the types of records. If they're requesting text messages and emails and things like that, we move those into the complex category. The volume of records requested. We can do a 200-page report pretty easily at a minimal cost, but when you're starting to talk about thousands and thousands of pages, then it moves into the complex area. And also, we go by a flat rate for the majority of our requests, $12.50 for a report, and photos are $30 generally. And when we move out of that flat rate, when things start getting into the hourly, we move that over into complex as well. Also, I don't think I mentioned that we waive the first 30 minutes on every request. So anything under 30 minutes, the fee is waived.
Okay, can you clarify? I'm sorry. What kicks something into hourly from what triggers hourly? That sounds like once you go to an hourly charge, it would automatically be defined as complex. So what goes into what makes it an hourly rate?
Yeah, so maybe I misspoke. I wouldn't say it automatically gets called a complex once it goes over into hourly, but we have, if it doesn't fit into the flat rate fee schedule that we have published already, which is $12.50 for a report up to, and I believe it's 10 pages, and we usually go way over that. We usually will give 30 pages for that $12.50 or more. If it's not just the standard report, photos are $30. We have a flat rate for a dispatch recording. If it's not one of those items that they're requesting that is on that list, then we will go with the hourly. Also, if they request several items that are on the list and we decide it would be, and we determine it would be less expensive to charge the hourly rate, we will go to hourly as opposed to an itemized list of various different records. So.
Okay, thank you. And forgive me if you said this and I didn't hear it. But the definition of complex, is that, you cited different types of records or the amount of records. Is that written down somewhere what the definition of complex is?
We do have some criteria. Some of them are requester types, and some of them are sensitive. They have to do with whether or not it's a sensitive, high-profile incident. So it's not just the volume of records, but that is one factor. The volume of records, types of records. Is it a sensitive incident? Is this something that is a high-profile incident? Maybe more time's going to be taken in, and considering what's redacted, things like that. So we have a lot of criteria that go into it. Those generally are much more voluminous requests. They generally require a lot more work, but we do get requests that we consider complex that the fee is $12.50 that we have put over to that group that handles those.
Okay, thank you. And thank you both for coming to talk with us. Todd, can I hand it over to you to check with other committee members since I can't see anybody?
Sure, and no hands up yet, so I'm going to jump in first. So Laura, Coral, thank you both for being here today. I really appreciate everything you said. It is, like Emily mentioned, it's incredibly helpful to look inside, as many public bodies as we can, especially large ones like yours that also have pretty well-developed techniques and methods and systems for addressing public records, because I think you really help point the way towards potential change that doesn't leave agencies without useful tools, but also continues to benefit requesters as well, as of course the law is one of confidentiality, not disclosure. As if you've ever heard any of my trainings, I say about 12 times throughout the training. So I really, again, just really want your opinions as practitioners in this work, not necessarily speaking for your agency or committing you to anything in particular, but for instance, just under the federal system, under federal FOIA, fees are broken up into categories, and I think it's like, collecting, it's like collecting and maybe like reviewing and et cetera, et cetera. And then certain types of requesters are only charged for certain types of categories. So say like a corporate or commercial requester would pay for all categories of producing records. So they would pay full freight. Educational institutions will pay maybe for one category of records, like preparing records, and I believe the public pays for two categories. So if Oregon adopted a similar way of charging fees, do you think that would, what would that do to the 90-something% of your requests that are pretty simple and average about $12.50? And what would that do to the more complex requests that tend to cost more money? Would that sort of capture your world now, or would it change what OSP charges? If I'm making enough sense for you to answer that.
Probably one of our main requesters for the 1250 records are insurance companies and attorneys. Insurance companies, their motive for getting the report is pretty simple. They don't have any reason to request the number of records that they're asking based on the fee. Attorneys, it's a little different story. Some of them are representing somebody in an accident and or an incident and need a copy of the report. Others are wanting large quantities of reports to look for potential clients. And so those two reasons, so it would be hard to say, okay, well, let's waive the fees for attorneys, because how can we say, let's waive the fees for attorneys who are actually representing a client and not the ones who are just looking for a client? For us and what we do, giving the reports to sometimes the citizens involved at a reasonable rate, and we even waive the fee for those sometimes, is much more important than giving the report to a citizen who's looking to, put it on YouTube. But citizen's a citizen. And so how do you break that out? And media, again, the problem is defining who is media. And so how do you determine that? So those would be the challenges that I would see to that.
The other thing that I would just like to mention real quick in addition is that OSP is also a little different in that a police report, we may charge $12.50 and it may be just a couple pages, a simple, I hate to say simple, but perhaps like a vehicle crash. Whereas you also have a police report that may be a homicide that has, 5 different troopers involved. So they each have their own report that they've written. There's interviews with witnesses, there's photographs, there's, the dispatch records for, 911 calls. And so no two police reports are the same. One may take, 5 minutes just to pull and review, and another may, again, become a complex request simply because of the information we have associated with that case that could take, 50 hours to go through or more. And so, I think that the way that we have things right now between the DAS fee schedule, which is kind of a set flat rate, versus having the ability to charge based on the true cost of gathering, preparing, redacting, and providing those records, gives us the flexibility based on the amount of work it will truly take versus any sort of tier or flat rate kind of blanket cost.
One thing that helps us be able to narrow the request is that it's not really an issue of transparency sometimes, because what we have on that incident is usually listed in the report. So sometimes we can say, for a much smaller fee, we can get you the report. You can look at that report, you can go through and see what we have and tell us what you want. And that usually comes after, a lot of times I'll say, no, just send me that fee letter. I want it all. But a lot of times after the fee letter, they'll, be more willing to talk to us, and we'll say, let's get you the report, and then identify what you're looking for, because it's all usually right there, what's in evidence.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, other members in the video or on the phone, do you have questions for our two speakers? Okay, hearing none at this time, I'd like to thank you both so much for coming and speaking to us today. We really appreciate it, and perhaps we might have some follow-up for you later, but again, thank you for your time very much. And we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Sherry Lafouri, the Public Records Unit Manager for the Department of Human Services. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to come share what we have going on at Department of Human Services about public record requests. You're going to hear some similar things as to what Jean spoke on earlier. Although we are separate agencies, we are still kind of sister agencies, so you're going to hear a lot of similarities there. I too want to take just a second and give a little bit of background about how our unit got set up, because different than some other agencies, we do have a partially centralized unit that handles public records requests. So I'm going to start there. So public record requests, as well as individual record requests for their own personal records, as folks may be aware, DHS is a ginormous agency with central office here in Salem and various field offices, local offices all across the state. And in mid-2019, there was a governor's executive order for child welfare, and part of that executive order was looking at public records request and getting timely and processes in place for that. Our number one type of record request that comes into our agency is actually for child welfare assessments. Even though they're generally highly confidential, that's the most common record that is requested. So the agency started centralizing that unit really quickly under governor's executive order mid-2019. We do most public record requests for the entire agency, and we do a split of individual record requests. So for example, let's take self-sufficiency and aging and people with disabilities. If there is a customer that's currently being served by one of our offices, they get their request taken care of there. If their case is now closed and they're looking back for historical records, they come through our unit. So we see a volume between those two types of records on average, and it fluctuates, but on average it's about 600 requests a month. And I know I see some familiar names and faces here in the crowd, and I know folks have said, oh, you guys are really lucky you have this unit and all this staff. I have 9 people, and that includes different levels, to do 600 requests a month. So it's great having a centralized unit, but it's still, like everybody else, we could use more resources for that. We're really still building our infrastructure around service level agreements with each division, program area, processes and policy around that. And I'm sure you guys can imagine, even in the smaller agencies, getting some consistency in that and buy-in from an entire agency is time consuming. I started managing the unit at the beginning of 2020, and I had high hopes that I could complete all the infrastructure by the end of the year, and I'm still working on it. So there was some questions around budget, and although we have a centralized unit, we did that in-house within the agency, so there is not a separate budget for the unit or for public records request. It's absorbed by the divisions and the program areas that we provide the service for. Similar to the other two speakers before me, We really only collect fees if we do it all for the locating, reviewing, and redacting of records. I did hear some other folks say that they don't typically do the charging for the locating. We do at times because we do get requests, again, in child welfare and some other program areas. We're in the process of scanning our physical files, but we have a lot of boxes and archive facilities. So we do charge if it's a very large request and we're needing to locate and scan large volumes. We do not charge for things such as copying, postage. If somebody requests a special avenue in which to get the records, like on a secured flash drive, we don't charge for stuff like that. It's really more about the reviewing and the redaction of records. When it gets into cost estimates, it's an interesting timing for this meeting. We're right in the process of adjusting, looking at our processes and adjusting a little bit. Similar to what folks said before me, media, nonprofits, as well as just individuals do request things that have a public interest lens. But sometimes those requests, maybe part of it truly meets that threshold that's in the DAS policy. Sometimes it's more they're looking for it to see if there's a story, or they're looking for a huge time frame worth of records to see what part of it might be a story or might meet that public interest. So we have found that if we don't charge for that stuff, the requests are kind of, they can be unmanageable, like some people talked to. So we do right now work with media or an individual nonprofit if we get a very large scope request. Similar to what folks said, a conversation goes a really long way to say, tell me what it is that you're really looking for. And it comes up with media a lot that they'll say, I'm really trying to get this story out in the Oregonian in 1 week. I need 5 years worth of data, let's say. We'll say, if you want to make that deadline for your story, I might be able to get you this by that time frame. And so it does start a conversation about, it's not that we are trying to not be transparent or not provide the records. They have a deadline that they're working towards. And so we'll have a conversation about, what do you really need for this story? There's a few, one of the questions that Emily had sent that's a topic of interest is, what are agencies doing preemptively if something meets the public interest? There's a couple of hot topics right now all over the place. And for us, I would say COVID is one of them. Definitely, we do the public records request for the facilities that are licensed by Safety and Quality and the Aging and People with Disabilities program. So we get a lot of record requests that really do. There are stories written about them. They meet the threshold. But occasionally, even with that, we're noticing people will be asking for what I think is much larger than what the threshold is. And so we do have to do some negotiation. But if I see that it's one of the topics, there's another hot topic, it's been in the media, so this isn't a surprise, but our child welfare, the child abuse and reporting hotline had some technical difficulties with wait lines and things like that to report child abuse. That's been a huge hot topic. So if there's a topic that we're noticing a lot of requests come in, and I know it's going to meet the threshold from what I can see, we don't charge for that unless, again, it feels like they're stepping outside of what that threshold is. The reasoning for that is, again, with a limited number of staff, I'm looking at, and I think Jean mentioned this point, the cost effectiveness of us doing the cost estimate and working back and forth with the requester. Sometimes it's easier for me, or it's more cost effective for me to have my resource really start working the request versus the back and forth with the cost estimate. So that's just something that we're weighing right now. Getting to a little bit on numbers. Again, similar to Oregon Health Authority, we don't do cost estimates unless they're really large requests. It's hard to give a threshold. I would say it's usually probably around $250 that I'll go, it's not cost effective to do that. Let's just go ahead and move forward. So we average about 45. Again, we've only been centralized for 2 years. I pulled some data and it looks like we've only issued out about 45 cost estimates per year. Of those, we got about, and again, I'm using round average numbers, about 15 fee waiver requests, and of those, half were approved. The ones that were not approved, I did some quick digging. It was generally the ones similar to what people talked to earlier, where it was a little bit more of maybe a personal interest or someone that is maybe saying they're a freelance journalist but wasn't able to articulate what they plan to do with the information. So it doesn't happen too often that we get them and deny them, but those are the categories where they fall really more on a personal interest. The remainder of those, usually the requester will reach out to us and say, hey, can we narrow that scope? That's a lot of money. It's very rare that people just don't come back or don't respond. I think that was one of the questions that folks were curious about. It's very rare that that's a barrier and a hard stop. It usually is a tool that starts a conversation with that requester. Okay, some of the things I wanted to touch on, and they're going to sound very familiar from folks before me. One of the things that is really hard to explain to requesters, whether it's an individual, nonprofit, media, all of the categories, is how much work goes into email pools. I heard every agency mention that so far, and the email pools are a challenge because I think sometimes folks think we have these magical databases where you just enter a few date ranges, maybe a keyword, and only that stuff pops up. Wouldn't that be nice? We get often requests for several years worth of emails between lots of employees. And so that typically always results in a phone call to the requester to try to explain how that search works. Because usually they'll say, I don't want to give you a keyword. That might, knock things out that I'm looking for. And so we explain there's not a way unless they help narrow the topic of what they're looking for in the emails or the search terms. To Jean's point earlier, that can return, we just did one the other day, it returned over 3,000 results. And so then we'll reach back out to them and say, ooh, we kind of did a high level review and I don't think what you're looking for, you're going to get much out of that 3,000. So let's talk about this. And so we just noticed that it's much easier to pick up the phone. I agree with what was stated earlier. It's much easier to get on a phone call than email. But I do find requesters kind of resist that at times. They would rather just, if they're looking for something that they think we don't want to give, they would rather make it more broad, I've noticed. The thing that takes the most time in emails that increases cost, aka staff time, is converting all of the files to PDF, all of the emails to PDF. So if we have, a couple thousand emails, it's a significant amount of time to convert those into a PDF to do the review and redaction. So I heard folks were asking about if we have ideas of what might cut cost or help with time. I think on the email, some way to kind of help requesters understand what that looks like. And I'm sure it may be different across the different agencies who are represented here today and ones that are not. But a little bit of education on what that looks like and any kind of even a statewide tool, a technology tool that helps with automating that conversion, because it's such a manual process, at least in our agency, that it's extremely time consuming. I'm also going to echo something that was mentioned earlier that would be helpful in terms of potential future legislation or rule or policy change. And that would be around making the formulas for fees and waivers just really simple. The DAS one appears to be simple, but when you get down into it, it's not as simple as it's displayed. So even if it was, they meet the threshold and you automatically waive 50%, I remember that being something that was discussed last year. That wouldn't be a huge impact to our agency because, like I mentioned, we don't charge media a lot now. And if we do, we typically already waive 50%. But it's looking at, do I waive it fully? Do I waive it 50%? Is there a partial? Like, there's just lots of elements that I think if we could simplify that, that would be appreciated. And things to consider with that is, we have requesters that aren't the media, that aren't these nonprofits, that aren't attorneys. We have, individuals, just, Oregonians or folks, even not in Oregon, requesting records with really limited funds. I remember I work for Human Services, so I'm always going to look at, the population that we serve, and there's limited funds. And so I don't ever want to get to a place where we put so much in that there's a barrier for people to access records. So I don't ever want to create a barrier, but I also want to make sure that our agencies aren't put in a position where we're doing it for free with the limited resources that we also have. So just kind of looking at a balance there. I also agree with some of the statements made earlier about what are some ways that we can do some incentive. I think the cost estimate definitely is can have an incentive with requesters to say, hey, if you narrow the scope, you might get this a little bit quicker. So I think money plays into it, but so does timeliness. So sometimes they'll say, well, if I pay you today, does that mean I'm going to get my records tomorrow? It doesn't exactly work that way, but I think there might be some things that we could think about that might help that. It's hard for me to explain to requesters, just because you paid doesn't mean you automatically jump the line ahead of everybody else who also has paid for their request. And I also want to echo what Jean said about the any and all. I don't know if it's super common with the other agencies that are here today, but we certainly get across all categories, they'll just put any and all. And so helping folks know that it's going to be most efficient in terms of us being able to serve them timely if we have a lot more information. Any and all, especially for an agency as large as DHS, when they don't share which program area might be they're looking for, that could be a challenge. So just even helping educating folks on what information we need to serve them better. Trying to think, is there anything big I missed that I wanted to capture? I don't think so. I think I'm ready for questions if you guys have them.
Yes,
and I talked fast, so I'm happy to repeat.
We can always look at the tape again if we need to. Thank you so much. It's very helpful. I have two questions. One is, appreciating it's not in the agency's desire to, do everything for free. Do you have a sense of how much right now the DHS is doing, quote unquote, for free, or a different way of saying that is like how much of the costs are recovered by fees?
Very little. I didn't get a chance to pull the actual amount collected, but I mean, we collect, how do I say this? I just had to approve my staff to still have access to the financial system where fees are because they went idle because they're not utilizing it often enough. So again, it's pretty rare. Like I said, about 15, we ended up collecting about 45 cost estimates, and then we approve 15 waivers, so about 30 per year. It's pretty low.
Okay. And then the second one's a little bit more complex, so I think it gets really at the heart of requests, at least from people who who are in the media generally. Other things are brought up about, requesters who stand to profit from public records and so forth. But you mentioned that, and everyone's spoken to the fact that like overly broad record requests are really tough. They take a ton of time and it's hard to make sure you fulfill it. I have filed requests with any and all in my request. And the reasons I do that is because two reasons. One, I don't know the inner workings of agencies. And sometimes I've been told, oh, we don't have any of those records. And I don't have any idea like which, you've been run around in circles, right? Within one giant agency and it goes here and then they say no, and I have to go to another place and they say no. So the fact that you've centralized it seems to me to be an excellent step and have people in there that really understand the nuances of the whole agency. But the other is this, I think, a potentially a trust issue, right? If you mentioned that if your feeling is if people are looking for something that they think the agency might not rather give, they tend to be more broad. So that to me is a core issue of trust. And I'm curious what you think you could do or state agencies could do or record, key record maintainers could do to build that trust so that, there are certainly times we have seen in very recently where agencies don't give records and they're discovered later. So what could you do from the provider side to build that trust so that and I'm mostly speaking from media experience. I don't really know what it would be like from a lawyer or a individual, but so that you feel confident that you can be frank about your records request and it will in fact be fulfilled. What can you do from the agency point?
Thank you for the question, Emily. That's a great one. And I'm going to echo my peer, Jean Wyndham, relationships and conversation. And of course, it's harder if it's an individual who only makes one request. But I've found, well, for us, we have in our centralized unit, and again, other parts of the department are still fulfilling record requests. So it's not just us, but I'm speaking predominantly from my centralized unit. Anytime we get a request for any and all, or I can tell that maybe they're hesitant about telling us too much because they give us just enough. I can tell like, oh, they're looking to see if they're going to find something that our agency did wrong. And what I've found is the absolute most effective, and it's hard to get tone and trust across in an email. Phone calls go so far. I've personally have reached out as the manager of the unit a few times. If we feel like that's a scenario, I'll call and reach out and say, I manage the public records unit. I can tell you're kind of looking for something on X topic. My job is to give you what you're legally entitled to that isn't exempt under the law. It's not my jam to tell you, whether it makes us look good or bad. My job is to give you what you're entitled to under the law. And if I can get that across on tone, usually they'll open up to me or people on my team if we can get them on a phone call. It's quite a bit more challenging. I staffed one with Todd this week. That's a little bit more challenging because the requester doesn't want to talk to us on the phone. Anytime we leave a voicemail, they quickly respond in an email. And it's one of those scenarios where they're looking for something that may not look that they think may make the agency look bad. And I don't have skin in the game. Again, my job is to fulfill their record request. And so I tried to send an email and call and leave a voicemail and say, I'm the manager, because I thought, so that makes sometimes people more comfortable to share, that information. So first thing that comes to mind in response to your question is really a conversation.
Okay, thank you. And Todd, let me, if I may, hand it back over to you to check in with other people about questions.
Oh,
I can't see.
Actually, I thought of a part 2 answer really fast.
Yeah.
I did get contacted by a couple of attorneys from the public defender's office and from some other organizations that attorneys belong to. Another thing is, and I'll just be frank, our agency has had a history at times of maybe not being as transparent, which is why we're here. My unit's here. And so just making sure that we are communicating with requesters on a very regular basis about if we need an extension, something's going to take more time, or the particular record they're looking for might be in someone's file cabinet that we're looking for, that it's not accessible on an online system. It's felt really good to get reached out by some of those organizations and say, wow, we've really noticed a change. Even if you guys can't meet the time frame that maybe we were hoping, you can explain why, what's getting in the way. So again, I think also what builds trust is just showing a pattern of behavior that builds it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. Mark, go ahead with your question, please.
Forgive me. Ms. Lafouri, thank you so much for being here today. I've really found this to be interesting. Earlier you mentioned, or you referred to the Attorney General's, what is it? I guess it's the model for charging, or no, it's the DAS.
The DAS model, yep.
The DAS model, forgive me. I sometimes mistake myself. I'm curious, you had mentioned that you didn't necessarily feel that DAS model worked sometimes, anyway. To define, if I recall correctly, whether or not it's a complex versus a simple request or what have you. Having this practical experience, I'm going to sort of go out on a limb here and see if you wouldn't mind, how would you change that, right? How would you use DAS's model and fix it in a manner that might be more reflective of the work that you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, and I'm sorry if I'm going to put you in a little bit of a spot here, Ms. Lafouri.
Bring it.
Would you break out that DAS policy and provide us suggestions that you feel would make the system work better? I find that sort of compelling, and I'm really interested in seeing what thoughts you have. Now, again, I really appreciate the state's perspective, albeit I'm going to readily admit, like Gene did previously, not all governments are equal, right? You've got a very large department with, I think it was 7 dedicated individuals, or at least that was the state police. You know, I represent local governments that have no full-time employees and just volunteers, right? But I'm curious to know if you have insight on how we can sort of categorize these simple versus complex requests in a more rational manner. I'm not suggesting that DAS doesn't know what they're talking about. That's not what I'm saying, but you having the practical experience of working on the ground in a department that does see its fair share of public records, I'd be very curious to see sort of how you would rework that DAS model and see if we can't gain some insights from folks such as yourself who are doing this on a day in and day out basis. Again, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and I've enjoyed listening to your insights. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mark, for the question. So I'm only going to be able to answer from my perspective. So please forgive me, other agencies, if what I'm going to say impacts you differently than it would impact me. I recognize that I am in a unique situation. So I just want to say that for the record in case I propose something that would have a really bad impact on another agency. So let me just start with that.
We'll blame it on Todd. Don't worry.
So I kind of hinted at it in when I was speaking, and for me, it just seems like it does get a little bit harder when people say, well, if it's public interest or media, you can waive it all or you can waive 50%. And if they can meaningful disseminate it, I'm just going to be, this is Cherie's opinion. This is not DHS opinion. Okay. I want to make sure that's clear as well. It just seems to be easier if we take out some of the, if this, then that with all these categories and do something just much more straightforward. So basically, if anybody, whether it's an individual, nonprofit, media, whomever, makes a request and it meets whatever the defined threshold is of public interest, and DAS does have that lined out, just knock off 50% and call it good for everybody. To me, I just spend a lot of time going, oh, gee, is this person going to be able to meaningful disseminate it? Is this an individual request? Is it a media outlet? And it takes a lot of time. So again, I'm just throwing this out there. I haven't totally done an impact analysis to see how it would impact my entire organization. But it just seems like it would be simple if we leveled the playing field for everybody and said, if it meets the public interest threshold, yes, we still probably have to estimate what the level of effort is, but then let's just do an immediate 50% off the top and call it good. That's just what comes off the top of my head with you putting me on the spot.
Yeah, no, and it's a totally fair response in my view. So if I understand you correctly, and forgive me, folks, because I'm a bit of a simpleton, as you figured out by now. So you think that there is a lot of improvement that could be made on the determination of what types of requests are or are not in the public interest? You think that is too difficult of a process, and there ought to be a more linear approach to being able to make that determination? Is that what I'm sort of hearing you say?
Yes.
Okay,
and an easier way to determine if we waive a full fee or half fees. I don't propose we waive all fees, because I'm gonna, echo what the two folks before me echoed. I think we would all need multiple new FTE in order to respond to that if we just said it was a full waiver, which is what led me to if it met public interest and we waived 50% of it and it was just that cut and dry. I think and this is just, my agency and me personally, it would be a little bit helpful to have a little bit more definition of public interest. And I'll give you an example. So I'm going to use one that's kind of real and kind of fake, honestly, to kind of protect it. But we get a lot of requests for different inspections and reports and visits to some of our, medical facilities. So with COVID right now, there's questions coming in about, hey, there's a COVID outbreak at this facility. I want to know the reports. I want to know the inspections, what was done to help prevent that. And then they'll also include in their request, and I want every employee's emails that ever was sent about this facility for the last 5 years. Well, we didn't have COVID 5 years ago, so it's hard for me to justify that that's public interest about a COVID outbreak in a local facility. So I have to almost dice that request up a little bit. So it would be nice if we had some definition, because they're reading, rule or reading even this. They're smart. They'll read the DAS policy themselves and say, well, of course it's public interest. We want to know what your interactions were with this facility for the last 5 years. And I don't disagree that there's not interest in that topic, but it doesn't generally always meet that threshold evaluation that's lined out in the DAS policy. So I personally could use a tiny bit of help defining what that means with some examples, as well as making it a flat whatever amount waiver. 50% is just what came to mind.
Well, I would certainly welcome any suggestions or recommendations that you may have on this topic, because I do think that it's a really important one, and could serve to make things, you know, we're all talking about access here, and one of the big complaints that has really spurred me to want to have this discussion is that, you know, many, or at least some people have claimed that local or government in general uses fees as a means to keep things from the public, right? That's problematic. I don't care who you are, whether you're on government side or the public side. That's a problem. How can we avoid that, right? Are there ways that we can encourage access while limiting the ability to use money as a barrier? And so I'm curious about your thoughts on this, and would welcome any feedback that you want to provide. I recognize, Sherry, that this is your opinion. It is not the opinion of your office or the department's office, or for that matter, the governor's office. I get it. But being a practitioner who does this on a daily basis, I'd be very interested in those that type of feedback. So again, thank you very much for your time today, and hope we'll learn some more from your insight and experience. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Tyler, you have your hand up.
Yes, and I just wanted to piggyback off of the comments of my colleague, Mr. Landauer there, and just get on the record, Mark, I think you said government side versus public side. I just want to be clear for everybody here. We're all here serving the public, and just acknowledging that I think where Mr. Landauer is coming from is just, you know, a very real sense that, especially coming from a local government perspective, you know, we have more priorities than we have funds to tackle every single one of them. That doesn't mean that we aren't all here to serve the public. It's just the harsh reality is we have to work within the constraints that we're given. But just wanted to reiterate for anybody listening, we're all here serving the public. Thanks.
And if I stumbled on some words there, folks, I'm happy to be corrected. Thank you, Tyler, for putting me back in my place.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I have one question and I'll leave it at that for you. So it seems like it's certainly the case at DHS, and I think it might be the case with a lot of public bodies at all levels, that the types of public records requests you see in a given time period, whether you know, you're a small special district out in Eastern Oregon or a large state agency is, you'll see requests for a lot of the same types of records over and over again. You know, for DHS, you name the types of reports. And I definitely think in my role as advocate, I spend a lot of time telling public bodies that you don't lose anything by helping a requester name the types of records they're looking for. Like I want data on this system. Oh, that's called report X. You tell them that, and then they know to ask for that, and they don't have to ask for any and all. So to what extent do you think it would benefit your work specifically at DHS, but maybe sort of like all records custodians in general, to either require or strongly encourage public bodies to start posting some sort of online dictionary of common terms and reports that you utilize in your work that would then be part of any, you know, publicly posted written policy, which of course means put it on your website, right? So I would just love to hear your thoughts on that.
I love that idea, and actually part of one of the items on my infrastructure project list that I'm working on for my unit is very similar to what you just spoke to, Todd, which is what are the most common type of records now that we've been, you know, here as a unit for 2 years, 2.5 or so. We kind of have a lens on what the most common things are that we get. So we were thinking about posting on our online portal page, as well as something that we can email requesters as, okay, if you're looking for something under, like also explaining our divisions, if you will, because people will say, I want all my DHS records. that can mean so many different things to an agency as large as ours. And I'm sure even the small ones, that can mean a lot of different things. And so it takes a conversation. Well, did you have interaction with us that you're looking, to see? And so we were trying to come up with a way without giving way too much information, but also being helpful as for each division, kind of explaining what service they provide and the most common types of records that we get requests for as kind of a resource to help guide folks and what they're requesting. So that's something that's definitely on excuse me, on the hopper for ODHS. The other thing that's kind of similar to your point is we do get asked for, lists of in-home facilities by this county. So that's something that if I get a ton of requests for, I might reach out to that division or program area and say, we're getting a ton of requests for this. Can you put the publicly available? Because of course, not everything is, releasable on facilities. We'll say, can you put the publicly available stuff on a website? And that has saved some time right there alone. So I echo and really like that idea because requesters don't know and we can't expect them to know the lingo and the language that we use. And so again, it takes a lot of time. But I try to instill just basic customer service help into my staff. And so we're really looking from a help lens. So Mark, getting back to one of your questions, we don't ever want to appear to be a barrier. So even if a requester says, oh, I can understand now that why you've explained it, why you need to charge me, here's my scenario. I have very limited funds and this is what I want to do with the records. I will be honest, even I'm always honest, but I'm just share. I waive the fee sometimes if they give me an explanation, and it may not perfectly meet the definition, but it's an access issue and it's the right thing to do. So that's just something that we do in our unit now, depending on the scenario of the requester and what they share with us about the request and what they're going to do with it.
I appreciate your flexibility. I mean, let's face it, we can't all be so rigid as to, break ourselves, and I recognize that absolutely. So I very much appreciate those comments and just sort of understood them that you're not so rigid, but at the same time, that going back to one of the points that Jean made and your subsequent speakers have all said, having the fees is a way to get things narrowed and tailored in a manner that is very helpful, not only to the requester, but also to the agency that's producing the reports. I mean, there's no reason people need to be wasting their time. It's a waste of the public's time. And so I very much appreciate that. And again, Ms. Lafouri, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you all for your time and questions.
Yes, and I want to echo Mark and everyone else's thanks to you, Lafouri. We just have about 12 minutes left before our 11 before our meeting scheduled to end, and I would like to hear from Kelly Rapps with the correctional and Michelle Whitney Dodson from the Correctional Services Division. Are either of you here?
Yes, I'm here. I'm Michelle Dodson. Hi.
Oh, Michelle, thank you so much for your patience. I'm sure there's some things that you may want to say that we have heard, which certainly welcomes. Say whatever you would like to say, but if there are things that are unique to the Correctional Services Division that you'd like to make sure we hear, feel free to push those to the forefront if you'd like. Anyway, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you so much. So for the sake of time, I'm going to pare down some of my comments that I had prepared, and then I will just forward them to you, Emily, so that you have them for the record. I do want to echo a lot of what everybody else has talked about today, as far as emails being sometimes the most challenging that we can deal with. We had one recently, 57,000 emails was the number of records that were responsive. Worked with the requester and we narrowed it down to 600 emails. We now have to go through and convert and review all of those emails to include all the attachments, and that takes significant staff time. Currently, there is one person to do that work specific to the emails, and that is me. And so when you're looking at the overall program for the Department of Corrections, we have 2 FTE for the records management program itself. We have no other budget for public records. The 2 positions are actually for program work and to help guide approximately 20 other people in the agency that process public records requests. DOC does follow the DAS fee schedule and fee waivers. We do waive the first half hour of fees. The majority of our requests actually fall within that first half hour to fulfill, so it's really minimal cost to the requesters. When we do provide an estimate, it does cover the processing of the request, the searching, the gathering, the reviewing, the redacting, some media cost and postage as appropriate. A lot of our requests are fulfilled electronically these days with email, and so a lot of those costs are not passed on to the requester. We do. Sorry, I'm trying to speed up and I've lost my place, so I do apologize.
Oh, take your time.
Sure. We do find that when we do put together a fee estimate for folks, we generally are underestimating our actual time with that. If we do happen to take a little longer than what we estimated, if it's within a half hour, an hour, hour and a half, we have a lot of flexibility in there. We don't go seeking more funds from the requester. It costs more money to process those checks than it does, so we try to balance that out. Likewise, if a request takes significant more amount of time, we will actually contact the requester before proceeding, especially in an email situation, and let them know, here's how many emails we have back, here's what we see being the issue with the fee estimate. Do you want us to start with the most recent emails and go until we hit the fees that you've paid, or do you want us to, where do you want us to start? How do you want to proceed? And so we do work with the requester on those. We've learned in our partnerships with the public that good customer service up front to clarify a request and educate them really increases their satisfaction and can reduce the request and demand on the agency and the employees, which has been the theme from everybody. Good communication is key. The department does use the guidance in the Public Records Manual as well as the DAS policy when reviewing fee waivers. Requests for fee waivers generally are from the media, the adults in custody, and attorneys. The department does receive about an average of 16 requests per year, and of those, an average of 5 requests are partially waived. It's important to note that there are many waivers that are not tracked due to the request being completed early in the process or not requiring an estimate or a payment. Our experience has shown having fees has not proven to be a barrier as far as accessing records for the public or for the adults in custody. The waiver of the first full half hour does allow for reasonable and specific requests to happen at no cost to the requester. The existing fee structure has allowed us to manage excessive AIC requests through the provision of estimates and the same customer service to clarify what the AIC is truly seeking. We have a unique population compared to many other agencies, and so we get quite a few requests from the adults in custody that can be quite challenging to navigate, and so it's a unique position for us to be in when they're seeking records. DOC does make basic records available to the AICs that are needed for the transition, the release, their health care at no cost. And we can inform the requester of existing avenues for specific reasonable requests. I do want to mention that we recently have seen an increase in requesters paying for large records requests, requiring well over 40 hours of staff time to review and redact records. And in some instances, it can actually be much more significant than that. And they are paying. It's typically attorneys that are paying those fees. And the last few significant ones, they've been up in the thousands of dollars, and they've paid those fees. The department's public records efforts are unique, as I mentioned earlier, in typing consideration, as most of our requests are regarding a specific individual who is or has been incarcerated. And while we do receive many requests from media and the public, most of our public records requests are done in preparation for litigation or by AIC's curiosities. Safety is a priority for us. In releasing records, and the nature of our records make them subject to specific records exemptions. Staff review records is often laborious as we ensure compliance with exemptions and safety of those in our custody. A good example of this is if you think of the Department of Corrections institutions as little mini cities, we have everything you can think of inside of an institution that you get outside in the community. And so one of the things that we have is we have investigations that occur within the institutions. And so when we get a request for investigations and it involves AICs, that can be really challenging to process those. You know, you have to take many hours of staff time to search, gather, review, redact those records. And due to the sensitive nature of our investigations, they have to be carefully reviewed and to ensure the safety not only of the individual, but the victim, the witnesses, and the institution. The requests can become quite intensive and very sensitive to process. Information released that should have been withheld can affect an individual's rehabilitation both inside prison and outside of prison, such as their housing, their work, their program participation, and potentially physical assault or even death. Also unique to DOC is for-profit organizations seeking records and then charging a fee to provide records to those on their websites. This typically involves their criminal records information. The department is proactive in our approach to public records disclosure, despite the lack of our resources in both staffing and technology. With updated technology, as some have talked about today, we would be able to set up an online submission for public records requests, allowing us to streamline the process as well as having a forward-facing portal for frequently asked records. As your committee thinks about improvements and solutions to enhance public records access in Oregon, we would offer the following considerations. Continue to support enterprise solutions to public communication, tracking databases and employee training, promote consistency in resource agencies like ours when managing incredible amounts of work related to the request. We encourage funding parity of resources and staffing for agencies. Outside of our 2 dedicated FTE, public records are an additional duty for many of our staff that are processing the request. We would be remiss if we didn't also acknowledge the employees processing public records requests respond to requests for records from other agencies, subpoenas, and litigation. And they're doing all of this while managing and running safe and secure prisons. Finally, we would offer that requesters' active participation in making a public records request is important. The current fee structure allows us the ability to have a conversation and help determine what specific records are seeking, which is a lot of what you've heard already today. And we welcome the opportunity to continue to participate in the review process and provide input as you're considering updated legislative proposals. Again, as previously stated, our records involve people, and care must be given in reviewing those records, as the consequences again can range from rehabilitation impacts, assault, or even death if the information is accidentally released.
Thank you so much. I realize we were at time. I don't know if you're able to stay at all, Michelle, and I don't know if any council committee members are. Are you able to stay for another few minutes? You can? Okay. Thank you. That's very generous of you. I know if some committee members have to drop off, we maybe can get back in touch with you later. I have one question. You mentioned with updated technology, you could do an online submissions portal, and then you mentioned a forward-facing portal for frequently requested records. My question is this: what does that mean exactly? A forward-facing portal for frequently requested records, and certainly some federal agencies and some state agencies, I'm not sure about in Oregon, but in other places, once they release a public record, they also post that. And for example, the EPA has a reading room for previously released records. Is that what you mean by a forward-facing portal for frequently requested records? And if not, is that something that would work potentially for the Correctional Services Division?
Sure. So what I would say is that the forward-facing portal, a great example of that would be some of our COVID records that were requested during the height of the onset of the pandemic. We were getting a lot of requests for very similar information. And so if we had a means to have been able to push that out, it would have, just taken care of everybody really quickly. Some of our records, or the majority of our records, are about individuals. And so, pushing those out for the public when there's not necessarily a big interest in one individual isn't necessarily something I would advise, because we are still being mindful of people's program, of their rehabilitation impacts, and we don't want to hamper that at all.
Yeah, understood. Thank you so much. Todd, I'm going to hand it back to you to see if anyone else has questions. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any questions from other members?
I do appreciate everybody's time today, and all the speakers. I mean, they've all expressed some of the same unique issues that we all face with public records disclosure, and we do our best to work very well with the requesters and try to get them what they need at the least cost, if not no fees at all. But if you have someone who wants that any and all and they're not willing to work with you, it's very challenging. And we do run into that frequently with our adults in custody. And it is a very unique situation for us to be in with their request.
Well, Michelle, thank you so very much for your time and for your patience. I'm sorry that we ran into a shortened period of time to talk with you, but really do appreciate learning more about what you're specifically doing at the Correctional Services Division. It's very helpful and very insightful, and very much appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who brought their expertise and insights to us today. Much appreciated. Before we adjourn, I do just want to give our members and anybody who's still on the call who's interested a sneak preview of what we expect to hear in the next set of hearings as we continue these in the spring. Friday, March 11th is our next meeting, and tentatively we are going to hear from Margaret Quokka, who has just written a fascinating book about the FOIA, the federal law, and how its use has evolved from some public interest to more potentially people with a personal interest in records over time. And Tom Sussman, who was the congressional counsel for the 1974 FOIA amendment. So that will be looking at the federal law. And then Friday, April 1st, we are going to be hearing from some folks in other states who have models that we may want to take a look at, from Oklahoma and Kentucky. And then on Friday, the 22nd, we are tentatively going to be hearing first from some more people in Oregon, including at the county and city level. And then we'll start pretty soon after that moving into trying to figure out what to do. So it should be fun and interesting, certainly a learning process. And I hope that everyone's here today can come back for those meetings as well. Do any committee members have anything they'd like to add before we adjourn?
Yes, Emily, it's Todd. I just want to welcome Tyler Jansen formally to the Public Records Advisory Council and the Legislative Subcommittee. I realize he himself did not choose to be on the subcommittee, but has slid in to replace his predecessor, for which we are very grateful. And it's important to continue to have representatives at all government levels in Oregon. So Tyler, we're very happy to have you here formally, despite your previous participation that was of your own volition. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, and I look forward to digging in the months ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Todd, for doing that. And Tyler, you have already dug in, so thanks for all the work you've done previously. Great, much appreciated and glad to have you. Anything else from folks on the subcommittee? All right, well then, do I need a motion to adjourn since we do have a quorum?
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, everybody in favor, say aye.
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 All right, we are adjourned, and I'll see you in 3 weeks. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.